Bruce Faulconer, the head of Faulconer Productions. Perhaps no other figure in the history of the English-speaking Dragon Ball Z fandom is more divisive and polarizing than Bruce Faulconer and the Faulconer Productions music score from the in-house Funimation dub. Thousands upon thousands of Dragon Ball Z fans grew up listening to Bruce Faulconer's music every afternoon on Toonami, and to them, that is the Dragon Ball Z that they recognize and that they grew up with and that they are nostalgic for, with fond memories of coming home from school and watching Earth's mightiest heroes do what they do best, kick a lot of ass. Then there's the other Dragon Ball fans who prefer other composers to Bruce. Either way, it doesn't matter. One cannot deny that Bruce Faulconer's music has had a tremendous impact on many, many lives for many, many years, and I've been hearing people clamoring for a Faulconer return to Dragon Ball for over 10 years since the series wrapped up being dubbed. And even to this day, people still want Bruce to return to Dragon Ball and compose music for Dragon Ball Super's English dub. Well, I'll tell you this, there's a lot of things about the history and the story of Dragon Ball Z, Funimation, and Bruce Faulconer that a lot of people don't know, and on this edition of Dragon Ball In Depth, I will tell the tale of the history of Faulconer Productions, Funimation, Dragon Ball Z, and hopefully shed some light on some stuff that you may not have known in a fair and unbiased capacity so that you have all the information. Let's get to it.
この放送はご覧のスポンサーの提供でお送りします。
Before I begin this video, I just want to give a quick disclaimer. This video is not about which Dragon Ball Z music you prefer or which one you like better or any of that stuff. This video is a completely unbiased look at the history of Faulconer Productions and Funimation and is meant as a historical and empirical informational tool, and that's it. So before understanding why Bruce Faulconer and Faulconer Productions will most likely not be returning for Funimation, you have to first understand why Bruce Faulconer was even hired to begin with. And even though he was hired in the summer of 1999, the reason behind him working with Dragon Ball Z is a precedent that was actually set back in the 1980s. Let's go back, my friends, and I'll tell you a tale. In the modern era, anime has been accepted as being Japanese animation, and we all know where it comes from, the fact that it's dubbed into different languages, and we can even watch it in its original language subtitles should we choose to. But that's not how it was back in the 1980s. Even before Funimation got into the anime game, companies like Saban and Harmony Gold were notorious for taking anime and completely butchering it to hide the fact that it was from Japan. American TV executives were paranoid about viewers being able to handle something that wasn't American. And I know a lot of anime purists who hate this, but the suits at the television stations couldn't care any less and definitely didn't back then. And it wasn't just the names that were changed. Shows were often left butchered in the editing room, with episodes being fused together or cut entirely, blood and gore being censored, entire plots were even changed and toned down for the younger Western audiences. Of course, the two most popular examples are probably going to be Voltron and Robotech, at least from the 80s, but this actually carried over into the 90s, and alongside Dragon Ball Z, you had Pokemon and Sailor Moon, the two Kingfish anime from the 90s, and even they were tremendously Americanized to the point where even the main characters' names were changed. Satoshi became Ash, Usagi became Serena. At least with Dragon Ball Z, Goku was still Goku, so we should be thankful for that one, right? But Dragon Ball Z still suffered from the same censorship and Americanization. So as a result of companies wanting to Americanize shows, many executives felt that even the original Japanese music had to be changed, and this is where the replacement scores came in. Tons and tons of 90s anime had replacement scores, including Dragon Ball Z. Now, in 1995, Funimation was not the same company as it would become and were somewhat, I guess, green or new to doing anime, and thus they outsourced a lot of their work. The aforementioned Saban Entertainment helped with the production, home video distribution went to Pioneer, and the voice acting and dubbing was outsourced to Ocean Studios in Vancouver, British Columbia, and thus this led to what will be referred to as the Ocean Dub Seasons 1 and 2 of Dragon Ball Z, which was our first exposure ever to DBZ in North America. Now, the music for those 2 seasons was composed by Shuki Levy and Ron Wasserman, the minds behind the music of Power Rangers, VR Troopers, and damn near every show Saban ever made. And Saban was a company, like Harmony Gold, notorious for taking Japanese shows, dubbing them, Americanizing them. They had been doing it for years, so naturally Funimation found a partner that was already familiar with getting stuff out to kids because Saban had been really successful with Power Rangers. So Saban's in-house composers was the first company to work on Dragon Ball Z's music, and when Dragon Ball Z started airing on Cartoon Network after having a failed syndication run, the series blew up. So whenever you see somebody on the internet claiming that Bruce Faulconer is the reason why Dragon Ball Z is popular, that is a fallacy. Dragon Ball Z was breaking ratings records before Faulconer was even hired. And the reality is that Dragon Ball Z was a hit no matter what. In other countries, Dragon Ball Z kept the original Kikuchi score and was tremendously successful. But you really can't deny the power of the Faulconer score in many people's minds as kids back then, but we'll talk about that later. So like I just said, Dragon Ball Z was aired in syndication in various markets at first and didn't really do well until it was on Toonami, and it blew the hell up, and as a result of that, Cartoon Network wanted Funimation to produce more episodes, but at that time, production on Dragon Ball Z had ceased. But once they saw how big it was, they had to bring in more episodes and continue the series. However, this time, Funimation shifted directions and made some adjustments. For Season 3 of Dragon Ball Z, things changed. Rather than have other companies work with Funimation to get these things out, Funimation brought everything in-house. In an interview that I conducted with Chris Sabat in February of 2016, Sabat outlined that one of the primary reasons for this change is because it became difficult for producer Barry Watson to have to fly to Vancouver to record with the Ocean Dub actors, so to cut costs, Funimation decided to go ahead and bring everything in-house in Texas and produce everything their own damn selves. And this is how guys like Sabat, Schemmel, Justin Cook, and these guys were hired to do Dragon Ball Z, and obviously it became a huge success, and they're still doing Dragon Ball Z to this day. That in-house Texas voice cast and everything that they did there is still the definitive English Dragon Ball Z crew, I guess you can say. No disrespect to anybody else, but that's kind of who's been doing the majority of the dubbing and will probably continue to in the future. Now, where does Bruce come in? Well, because Funimation and Saban no longer work together on Dragon Ball Z, that means that Shuki Levy and that whole crew couldn't work on the music of the series, and thus they needed a new composer. So who happened to live right around the corner in Dallas, Texas? That's right, Bruce Faulconer, Faulconer Productions, otherwise known as Cake Mix Recording Studios, which is where the Dragon Ball Z soundtrack, the Faulconer soundtrack, was produced that everybody remembers. But what many don't remember, or in many cases don't even know, is who actually did the music for the series. And yes, it was Faulconer Productions, but it wasn't just Bruce Faulconer. And a few of these musicians have been quite vocal about this, but we'll get to that in the next segment. In an interview with Black and Fist conducted in the summer of 2015, Bruce himself reveals that he was contacted by Funimation CEO Gen Fukunaga while working on a PBS special about hot air balloons. Faulconer was hired immediately to come in and do the music for Dragon Ball Z, starting with episodes 67, and he would continue to do the music all the way until episode 291. What he did not do was the first 2 seasons when they were redubbed. Faulconer Productions only scored Dragon Ball Z episodes 67 to 291 and a few bits here and there of some of the movies, and that's it. Nothing more. So if somebody ever tells you that they love a Faulconer score that isn't in one of those episodes I just named, it's either Nathan Johnson or Mark Menza, but we'll talk about that a little bit more later on. So Gen Fukunaga contacts Bruce, and he wants Bruce to produce music for Dragon Ball Z's replacement score for the new English dub, seasons 3 until the end of the series, and Bruce does it. And one of the things that Gen had asked Bruce to do was to make sure there was music playing at all times. This is one of the biggest criticisms of the Faulconer score, is that there's always music on, even in moments where there should be silence or drama. There's always music blasting. This is not Bruce Faulconer or Faulconer Productions' fault. He was just doing his job, and he does not deserve to be attacked for this. So let's keep it very fair. A lot of the vocal Dragon Ball Z community back then used to hate this about the music, and they would blame Bruce, and it really wasn't his fault. But those who knew that it was Funimation's call, they also cited the reason being that Funimation felt that American kids couldn't stand silence, that there had to be music at all times, or they would lose interest. Obviously, times have changed since then, but that's one of the things that was heavily talked about in the fandom in those days. Now, somebody very close to Funimation at that time privately informed me, I'm not going to give out who it was, they privately told me that they felt the reason why Bruce was hired is not just because he was local, but because he was also not very expensive. However, one thing that we must state in the interest of fairness, because we have to be fair here, is that the Dragon Ball Z English dub was a very rushed production. This was very, very rushed, and thus Bruce and his group of musicians had to compose the music very quickly. So Bruce Faulconer critics have to also understand that he was under a lot of pressure to do a lot of music. 22 minutes of music per episode, multiply that by all the episodes they did, which is quite a bit. It's a lot of work. And as a result of that, it does make you wonder if the music that Faulconer Productions produced would have been different if they had more time. But that's a question we'll never have answered. Now, speaking of Bruce and Faulconer Productions, the big misconception from a lot of people is that Bruce did all the music, when the fact is he really did not. Faulconer Productions at the time was composed of a number of individuals such as Bud Gwynn, Mike Smith, Julius Dobos, and the most vocal of the whole crew, Scott Morgan, who is now the CEO of Morgan Studios. A lot of these guys were just college kids looking to get into the industry, and they got in by doing one of the biggest and most successful anime of all time, so good on them. Scott Morgan himself has stated several times that there were tons of tracks that were produced that Faulconer gets all the credit for, even though it was a collaborative effort, sometimes being entirely done by somebody else. For example, the Dragon Ball Z intro music. In the interview with Black and Fist, Bruce himself said that was the favorite track that he did. But one thing that people might not know, or that he didn't state in the interview, is that the crazy guitar riffs for the Dragon Ball Z intro music, that was provided by freelance guitarist Bud Gwynn. Bruce was already an accomplished and talented piano player, and that was his forte, but the guitars were done by Bud Gwynn. A lot of the Cell Saga music was produced by Scott Morgan. In fact, if you go to Scott Morgan's YouTube channel, it's undeniable that he worked on these songs because he replicated them perfectly in some of his remixes. Now, for me, my personal favorite song from the Faulconer score is the SS3 transformation music, Ascension. But how many Bruce Faulconer fans know that this song was actually composed by Hungarian musician Julius Dobos, otherwise known as Forgotten Future, who actually would go on to produce music for several motion pictures and release several albums. But before that, he was the unsung hero of the Buu Saga, producing numerous songs alongside Bruce for the Buu Saga of Dragon Ball Z's dub.
Hello, this is Julius Dobos. I'm an electronic music composer. I work under the pseudonym Forgotten Future, and this is my main synthesizer.
Now, I'm not trying to sit here and say that Bruce wasn't involved. That's not what I'm trying to do at all, because the thing with the music is that it was a collaborative effort from everybody in the Faulconer Production studio, but I want to elaborate to people who always credit Bruce Faulconer as being the man behind the music, he was not the only guy. Scott Morgan deserves just as much love, and in the past has been very vocal about that, and everybody else who worked on it in Faulconer Productions, Mike, Bud, Julius, all deserve the same amount of respect. So Faulconer Productions as a unit got together and produced the music for 243 episodes of Dragon Ball Z. But the question is, what about GT? What about the movies? What about the redub of Dragon Ball Z, the Ultimate Uncut episodes 1 through 66? What actually happened between Funimation and Faulconer? That's up next. In 2002, Funimation and Faulconer Productions parted ways. But what actually happened? In preparing for the production of this video, I did a lot of research, hours upon hours of it, and spoke to a lot of different people about the situation. But according to the things that I've read and people I've talked to, for some reason Bruce rubbed certain people the wrong way. Now obviously there's two sides to every story, and I don't know the man personally, and it was, many, many years ago. But one commonality that I continued to find over and over again in my research was that many people within Funimation found Bruce very difficult to work with, and thus when it became time to dub Dragon Ball GT, Bruce was not brought back to do the music, and instead Mark Menza was hired to do the Dragon Ball GT soundtrack. Now the fallout from Faulconer not being brought in to do GT is a thing of legends, and in my research I've heard so many crazy stories that when Bruce Faulconer found out he wasn't coming back for GT, that he started giving away the private emails of top-level Funimation executives, encouraging people to email them and demand he be brought back. But because I have never actually seen any of these emails, I can't confirm or deny this. It's just stuff that I read and was told. I've also heard some very strange stories about Bruce showing up at the Funimation offices himself unannounced, behaving irrationally, but I don't really want to get into those because I cannot confirm them. I was not there, and one thing I can't stand is rumors being spread about somebody. So at the end of the day, all I know for certain is that Bruce was not happy that he was not brought back to do GT. Several people have said that one. And honestly, can you blame him? He just got done doing DBZ. It would make sense to do GT, and ironically enough, a lot of Dragon Ball fans, I would actually say the vast majority of them, even the ones who did not love Bruce's music, preferred his score to the Dragon Ball GT Mark Menza score anyway. I find that kind of ironic. But from my understanding, Faulconer Productions was still supposed to come back and do the music for the redub of the first 2 seasons of Dragon Ball Z until things got ugly in court. In 2003, Faulconer Productions Music Corporation filed a lawsuit in the U.S. District Court for the Eastern District of Texas, September 24th, alleging that Funimation Productions and certain other defendants fraudulently induced it into entering contracts pursuant to which Funimation had commissioned it to compose music for certain television episodes. Faulconer Productions claimed that it owned all copyrights in the music and that Funimation infringed upon its music rights. So what does this mean in English? Well, I'm no lawyer, but pretty much what it means is that Bruce was unhappy with the contract that Funimation gave him and felt that it was a fraudulent contract. Some people have stated that Bruce sued them out of malice because he was salty that he didn't come back for Dragon Ball GT, but I don't know if that's the case here. I really don't believe that to be the case. Funimation owned the rights to the Faulconer Production score of Dragon Ball Z, and Bruce tried to sue them to get the music rights back, and then things got nasty. Did he deserve the music rights back? Well, I'm not a judge. It's not up to me. But the judge did make a verdict. Faulconer Productions Music Group sued Funimation for damages seeking $13 million. Funimation would then countersue seeking penalties of $47.3 million for copyright infringement or a trial-determined amount for disgorgement of profits, whichever one was higher. And they also wanted attorney's fees. The 2 cases were actually consolidated in the Texas court and finally reached a settlement on December 21st, 2005, in which Faulconer Productions received a payment of $680,000 and thus completely ending the relationship between Funimation and Faulconer Productions Music Company. This is probably the biggest reason as to why Bruce has never and probably will never come back to Dragon Ball or Funimation ever again. So when you look at it from Funimation's side, if somebody sued you for $13 million, would you ever hire them again? The funny thing is that I did ask you on Twitter several months ago, if somebody sued you for $13 million, would you ever work with them again? And an astounding 84% of people said no based on 905 votes. Obviously, that's not a lot of votes, but it still shows that most people would not work with someone who sued them for that much money. So, from Funimation's end, most of you agree with the decision. From Faulconer Productions' point of view, he felt that the contract was unfair, but he got paid his settlement, and that's the end of the story. So when the time came for Funimation to dub the first 2 seasons of Dragon Ball Z for the Ultimate Uncut editions, they hired composer Nathan Johnson to take care of those themes, who also produced the soundtracks for some of the Dragon Ball Z movies, and he pretty much wrapped up all that was left as far as the replacement scores for Dragon Ball Z. This was all wrapped up over 10 years ago, and what you have to remember, like I said at the beginning of this video, is that Funimation's a very different company now as far as how they produce things to how they were back then. Replacement scores in anime are no longer a thing or nowhere near as prevalent as they used to be. So it's not even a matter of Bruce coming back or even Mark Menzer or Nathan Johnson. Funimation, the way they dub things now, they don't use replacement scores anymore. That's why Dragon Ball used the original soundtrack. That's why Kai used the original soundtrack. And that's why a lot of the other anime they produce uses the original music from the Japanese version, because replacement scores are just not a thing anymore. So will Faulconer Productions ever come back to do Dragon Ball? Highly unlikely. I've outlined the reasons why in this video. And if you are a fan of the Faulconer Productions score, make sure to support Scott Morgan, Julius Dobos, and Bruce Faulconer. I'm going to go ahead and put links to all of their websites and their YouTube channels in the description so you guys can check them out. And remember, even though the possibilities of Faulconer Productions ever coming back to do anything with Funimation are slim to none, it doesn't mean you can't enjoy the music that they already produced for us so many years ago. Thank you for watching this edition of Dragon Ball In Depth, and I hope that now you will spread the message out to other people who want Bruce to come back to understand that this is why he's not coming back, this is what happened. But regardless of your opinion of the Faulconer Productions score, these men should be respected as musicians because playing an instrument is challenging and it does require talent, and everybody who worked at Faulconer Productions is absolutely talented, and without question, they should be respected, and they will always be remembered as a time capsule of what the Dragon Ball Z English dub was, for better or for worse, in the late 90s and early 2000s. Thank you for watching this video. I will talk to you down the road.